Hello and welcome to element number 3 in our series on how to find your leadership style. If you're new here, check out the introduction video on this series where I give you the overview of the 5 elements that make up your leadership style. Just to quickly wrap up, there's you and your personality, what you bring to the table. There is your team in terms of the individual team member. That's the focus of this video. There is your team as a whole and the dynamics that the group develops. It is the task that you're trying to accomplish, and it is the organization or the environment in which you're operating. Just to wrap this up. My name is Angelika. If we haven't met yet, I'm a leadership coach, social psychologist, holistic healer, and I have led 15 years of change management initiatives in IT rollouts. So as a social psychologist, I'm the natural IT leader, right? I'm glad you're here, and I'm super excited to dive in with the element of your leadership style that informs one aspect, and that is your individual team member. Because no matter what personality you bring to this team, you will have to be somewhat flexible in figuring out how to tickle the best performance out of an individual team member. We'll look at your team as a whole later on. So if you are familiar with the situational leadership model at all, then what I'm going to share with you will ring familiar or sound familiar and ring a bell. I'll show you the skill will matrix that Hershey and Blanchard introduced. Hershey is the one with the chocolate, right? It's Hershey. Sorry. Anyhow, I'll show you that matrix in a second. The clue with the situational leadership model was that it asks us to be individually specific to a certain situation. Because up until the time that Blanchard and Hersey introduced that model, there was always this idea of either a leader bringing their own personality and characteristics to the way we lead, which is one element, but it's not the only one, or that there's 2 different styles. One is people-oriented and the other one is task-oriented, and full stop, like that's it. And the situational leadership model and the introductors, they ask us to be way more situational in our approach, and that means having a look at our individual team member, but not kind of once and for all. Similar to how we're looking at your own leadership style and anchor you in that, but not like say, this is how you behave once and for all, but rather be adaptable. So what does that mean in terms of your team member? You can have the very same person in your team in one situation with one task, totally in their element. They have a lot of experience. They are highly motivated, and you just know that they will do it, or you just say, can you please take care of that? And they go, and you know they're doing a fantastic job. And in the very next moment with a totally different task, they're a beginner. They've never done this before. They may be insecure. They may have just finished the course or the certificate. They don't know exactly how to begin. And they may, on the other hand, may be super motivated, or they may not be so motivated because they're insecure or they didn't really volunteer for it. And then you will have to work with that very same team member, which you just sent out and said, hey, go. I trust you. You just do this perfectly. Whenever you're ready, come back with the result. Or if you need me, I'm here for you. That very same team member with a different task, you may have to sit down, talk way more often, give them way more guidance, give them way more structure, and break down the individual baby steps and be much closer to them with that one task. And that is the general concept of the situational leadership model, to say, okay, we need to look at our team members one by one, and we need to look at them in each situation and adapt our own style as a leader to help them get to the best performance we can, they can deliver, and we can kind of tickle out of them. So there's a lot of talk, or the basis is this famous skill-will matrix that you may have come across before, because there's 2 dimensions which inform or help you guide your leadership style, depending on where you assess or how you evaluate and observe where your team member currently falls with this particular situation or this particular task. And these dimensions are their skill, their competency, like the person who just started the job, who just comes in fresh from university, has never done the job before, or the person who's been a developer in one software and now needs to apply this to a totally different environment, or someone who's been working for 20 years with one client and is now moved to a different organization and needs to adapt to the different style of handling this client, may also fall into the category of low skill in that particular instance, in that particular situation. So skill is one major dimension, and will or motivation is the other dimension. So does the person actually want to do the task? Like, who wants to do the receipts and make sure that that everything is reimbursed and do a large list of everything? Or who wants to do the inventory on all the IT cables? Some people may actually volunteer for that, but others won't. Or who wants to volunteer to organize the farewell party for a colleague? Some people will naturally say, yay, I'm going to do it. And half the other bunch will say, ooh, I'd rather not. And that's an individual choice. So we're not necessarily judging someone on their overall motivation to do a good job. Although, of course, let's be honest, that may be the case, that you're dealing with a team member who's just not willing to perform. Whether they feel they're misplaced, whether they feel that you're the wrong leader, whether they feel they deserve more, whether they're just frustrated because their best idea wasn't taken and chosen as the tool, a tool of the month, or whatever the reason might be. If you're dealing with someone who's not motivated, you have a hard task as a leader. So I want to distinguish between someone who is overall not motivated and who's not so motivated to do this particular task. Because let's look at it individually. That makes a bit more fun out of it. And it's way more realistic, because I like working on the assumption that most people come to work with the best intention of doing a job and of doing a good job. I can still then handle the ones who are the exception. But if I go into work thinking, nobody wants to do anything, nobody's motivated, I'm going to have so much more of a hard day and so much more of a hard job. So I choose to believe that most people actually come into work willing to do a good job. Your choice, of course, how you want to do that. Let me take you to the skill-will matrix so that we can have a closer look at this. So this should be visible now. On the one dimension, the arrow up, you can see the will and the this is how it looks, the will skill-will matrix. And what it provides is one of those classic 4-field matrices where you can, depending on how you assess or observe your individual team member, when you look at how they approach a task or how you see them starting in your team, you can see whether you rank them as high in motivation and will and high in skill, so they have experience, they actually know what to do, how to approach this, or whether they are low in will and motivation for whatever reason, because they're not the natural volunteer to organize the party, and low in competency and skill, because they may have no experience with that, or whatever the reason might be, or any other combination thereof. I highly recommend that you do this overview when you start with a new team, and have a look at and really make it visible to yourself who you see where, and also look at your first impressions versus how things play out as you go along, because first impressions are first impressions. And with the backdrop of seeing that as a situational thing, like the same person can be highly motivated and highly skilled in one moment, and with a totally different task 5 minutes later, you will have to sit down and take them by the hand, teach them step by step, and be much more close to them in your leadership. That means that you have to be a bit more adaptable, and also it means that there's no like one impression that is extrapolated forever. So that's kind of the appeal of working with this model. Keeps us on our toes. So it requires you to be a bit more open and flexible. And you may actually be surprised every now and then. You may think that you have a team of consultants or developers who've been in their job for 10 years. You may have actually done 10 rollouts. I did a project audit where the team had been super successful, had been working with that particular project leader in 5 different projects. And then in the one that I was auditing, they were at a complete loss because they had a different database underneath for the first time. They also worked with someone who would how do you say that? Who would design the user interface, and they were no longer kind of the masters of the whole process from screen down to database. They were just somewhere lost in the middle, and they were completely lost in the beginning, and no one had realized that because they had been 10 years in their consulting role, 10 years in their experience with that particular software, super experienced with that client organization, with that type of project. So noticing and making consciously aware, I've heard that from me before, making consciously aware yourself and your impression of where you see your team is a good start when you actually go into a new team situation. So how to work this? What do? You can print out this skill will matrix, or just draw it on in your notebook, and think of each of your individual team members and think about them like, do you think they are high in skill and competence and high in will, or where do you rank them? And then basically make a dot in one of the quadrants. And then my extra recommendation is not just to look at individual team members, but also when you have all your team members dot by dot, have a look at where you see the majority of your team, because you will have a totally different experience as a leader when most of your team is in the high will and high skill quadrant, which means that you can basically say, okay, you guys know what to do. Let's arrange like where we're headed. Let's make sure that we're all aligned in which direction. And then they go. You just probably need to make sure that you keep them aligned enough, because they're so experienced and so free that they can actually run on their own. You need to be updated regularly so that you know what they're doing, and you need to help them stay the course. On the other hand, if the majority of your team members are either new or inexperienced, or for other reasons low in competency and not so strong in terms of motivation and drive, you will spend a lot more time and a lot more kind of in smaller chunks with that team than if you have that other bunch. And making sure that you're aware of where your team sits on this quadrant will help you make some choices in your approach to leading this team. So this is the skill will matrix. Let me just stop the sharing and come back to you. We were coming from looking at your individual team member with like, okay, where do they fall in those quadrants? And I could go into like how this has nothing to do with micromanaging and stuff, but I think we will address that somewhat later. Remember how we were saying earlier that whatever your own preference and your own personal leadership style is, it may not work depending on where your individual team member sits. If you have this bunch of go, 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 and everyone is super experienced, and you just have to tell them, hey, this is the direction, let's be sure that we're on the same page, and you can rely on them that they actually know what to do. You just need to make sure that they report back to you and keep you in the loop. You will have a hard time if your personal preference is to know every single step and to have structured and orderly updates, because sometimes this bunch of people will actually naturally fall in sync with that, but sometimes they just may be so selbstständig. I'm German, by the way, so sometimes I need to think about what the word in English is. So they may be so self-reliant and so independent that they just go, and you may have a higher need for being kept in the loop. So your challenge might be to transport your needs and make sure that they don't see that as a restriction to their freedom and your acknowledgement of their competency. So that might be a challenge. Whereas with your other team members who are more in the corner of low motivation and low skill, you might have to go out of your comfort zone. If you'd rather lead a bunch of people who are go, 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 and you just say, hey, this is the direction, let's move, it might be totally uncomfortable for you to have to sit down and go step by step with breaking down tasks and guiding people and having a lot of checkpoints in order to make sure that they understand and actually do the next step and checking in again and doing the next step. So that might be super strenuous for you. And that's why there is not just one element to choosing or finding your leadership style, but it is a combination of different factors, and it's highly individual to your overall situation. Let's just touch base quickly on how that applies to the team dynamics when you look at the team as a whole. Because if you use the skill matrix, or the skill wheel matrix, I should say, and you see like where the majority of your team falls in terms of when you do the ... on the matrix, and you see that the majority is in one of the quadrants, you already know that that probably informs how you need to lead this particular team. In addition to that, if you've seen the intro video with the overview, then this will ring familiar. Each group will also have, from their personalities, which may have something to do with skill and will or may not, maybe a totally different dimension, they will bring a different dynamic. So you may have to do with a group of joking, fun-oriented, funny people. And if you're very serious and very operations-minded, you will be impatient or frustrated when you walk into their office or bring them into an online conference call, and you first have to make sure that they can actually focus on, hey, guys, we need to talk about tasks. You may get a bit impatient. That may bring you out of your comfort zone. Or on the other hand, you may have to do with a group who is used to having heated discussions about whatever type of task priority argument, and you may be challenged because this is outside your comfort zone. So looking at the drive, I call it the dynamics, and I often use the 4 elements to distinguish that, because that comes natural to me to describe it. Sometimes we have a lot of discussions, and we need to ground that energy in order to provide structure and process and progress along with the process. And sometimes we have too much of the earth element with slow, steady pace and a lot of structure, a lot of adherence to the rules. And then we need to push in order to get some speed and dynamics into this team. So I'll go deeper into that another time, just to give you some ideas of what you might be dealing with when it comes to finding your leadership style and looking at your individual team members with the help of the skill will matrix, and finding out how do you as the leader best approach them and communicate with them in order to bring them to their best performance potential. And also looking at the whole team from a group dynamics perspective, but also from a skill will matrix perspective, because depending on where you have the heavy load, so to speak, in the quadrants of the skill will matrix, you will have to be aware that you have a bit more tasks or a bigger job inside or outside your comfort zone, depending on where you fall with your personal leadership style or your natural preference. Right. I hope this makes sense. If you love this type of information and advice, then I'd love you to subscribe, like, comment, and come back here next time. In the next video, I'm going to look closer at the next element in finding your leadership style, and that is the task you're trying to accomplish with your team and the environment in which you're doing that. So I hope I'm seeing you again, and see you next time.